How you doing?
I'm good.
Inviting all the legislators who are here to take their seats, please. I am going to call this meeting of the county legislature to order and ask the alternate deputy presiding officer, Denise Ford, to lead us in the pledge. Mike, please call the roll.
Thank you, presiding officer. Roll call. Deputy presiding officer Howard Coppell.
Here.
Thank you, Howard. Alternate deputy presiding officer Denise Ford. Thank you. Legislator Sela Bino. Legislator Carrier Salage. Carrier Salage. Well, I'll come back. Legislator Deborah Millet.
Here.
I can see Legislator Salage is on the...
Okay, so Legislator Salage is present. Legislator C. William Gaylord III.
Present.
Legislator Vincent Muscarella.
Here.
Legislator Ellen Birnbaum.
Here.
Thank you. Legislator Delia DeRiggi Whitten. Legislator James Kennedy.
Here.
Legislator Thomas McKevitt. Legislator Laura Schaefer. Legislator Laura Schaefer. We'll come back to that. Legislator John Ferretti. Thank you. Legislator Arnold Drucker. Okay, thank you. We'll come back there. Legislator Rosemary Walker. Legislator Josh Lafazan.
Here.
Thank you. Legislator Stephen Rhodes. Legislator Minority Leader Kavan Abrahams.
Here.
Legislator Presiding Officer Richard Nicolello.
Here.
Let me come back for a second, Richie, Legislator Laura Schaefer.
Here.
Thank you. And Legislator Arnold Drucker. Okay. Sir, we have a quorum.
All righty, when Arnie connects, we'll make sure we note that for the record, so the record is clear. We have the one item, which is a resolution pursuant to Section 305 of the County Government Law of Nassau County to reconsider and approve items vetoed by the county executive in relation to the 2021 Nassau County budget. Moved by Legislator Ford, seconded by Legislator Rhodes. And that's before us. Before we start our debate and discussion, I would like to invite Maurice Chalmers up from the Office of Legislative Budget Review.
I'm on now.
Okay, we have Arnie's here.
Thank you.
Maurice Chalmers, OBR.
Okay. I understand that we have received the latest sales tax check, right?
Correct.
And what was that? What was the results of that?
I believe it was a negative 5.5. It was in the 5% range.
Okay,
Negative.
-5% for that time period.
Correct.
I think it's negative 5.78%. Would that be accurate?
Yes, but I didn't have the right exact number
Okay.
in front of me.
So now, with that sales tax in, what's sales tax check in? What is the year to date?
I believe it was a negative 8 point. Hold on just a second. Year to date, we were at a negative 8.6%.
Okay, now we know that the county executive and the management and budget office made a projection that we would be down 20% for the year 2020. How much would we have to go down to achieve for the rest of this year to achieve, not to achieve actually, for us to wind up at minus 20% for 2020?
The negative 20% from the Office of Management and Budget is 20% of the entire budget.
Correct.
So it doesn't really take into account the actuals that we have received to date.
Right.
So taking those actual to date and matching up to their numbers, the remaining checks would have to decrease by 52.4% in order to get to their number.
Okay.
So I'm sure at some point they're going to have to update their numbers.
Right. So the November 5th check was for what month? It was for September, correct?
Correct.
And
Now,
so-
next week, we get the final check that basically wraps up the entire month of September.
Okay.
So it's partial September. It has a couple different dates.
So we're in November now. Obviously, October has gone by. There has been no complete shutdown, so we can safely expect that the sales tax check for October might be down somewhat, but it's not going to be down somewhere in the range of 50%, correct?
I don't believe it will be. I don't think we received any sales tax check that was down by 50%.
Through the entire year, through the height of the pandemic.
Correct.
Okay. Now, with respect to the controller's estimates, on the high side, how much will we have to go down to achieve, to meet the controller's estimates of what he thought we might decline in 2020?
If we take the numbers from the October 2020 from the Controller's Office, he presented three scenarios. On the first scenario, which is the high probability of having a second wave of COVID, the remaining checks would have to decrease by 73.8% to get to that high number. He also had a moderate scenario, which would only imply a decrease of negative 38%. He had a low scenario, which would only be a decrease of 2.1% in order to hit the number that they are projecting.
Okay. But I mean, in terms of his high scenario, his moderate scenario, you're talking about it have to go down between 38 and 73% for the rest of the year, correct?
That, yes.
All right. Does anyone have any questions from Maurice? No? Okay. Okay, Legislator Ford?
Maurice, over here, thank you.
Yes.
Just one quick question then. You know, considering that we do not have the final check, so we don't know, we're going to get it next week, we don't know, has there been any correspondence from the state controller warning us that we're going to see a dramatic decrease in the amount of projected sales tax in the next check?
Not to these numbers. The numbers that OMB has, and actually our controller, are very high, some of them. I don't foresee having a decrease to that effect, but, you know, there's always a possibility, and
But one would think that, you know, based on us going through this and just the overall state of New York State, I would think that maybe the controller at DiNapoli, if there was a problem, would have indicated this to a lot of us already, correct?
He probably would have, yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Legislator Reggie Whitten and Legislator Rhodes.
Hi, Maurice. Always good to see you.
Thank you.
Have you had a chance to look at the difference of what is going to be, with the vetoes, as far as the expense of the two different submitted budgets?
What do you mean?
Like with the amendments, do you know what the cost is for the majority's amendments?
The majority's amendment basically replaced some items in the budget and replace it with different items. So in essence, what their amendment did is it recognized more in sales tax and did less of the borrowing. So their amendment took into account the national portion of the borrowing or the cash flow savings that we could generate based on the PFM report, and only did that portion. The way they balanced it is with the additional sales tax, the projected additional sales tax.
Does the number 63.6 million sound about right as far as the comparison of the administration's budget and the majority's budget?
Don't know where that number came from.
I'm hearing that's kind of the difference or the gap between what she's proposing and what the majority is proposing.
Again, I'm not sure where that number came from, so I can't talk to that number.
Okay, thank you. And just one other quick thing. How often do we get the sales tax checks?
We get a check next week on the 11th, and in December, I think we get 3 checks in December.
So we get them throughout the year, correct?
Correct.
I mean, if we do find that, I love how the rosy news, and I want to believe it. Believe me, I'm very, very worried all the time about my parents and everyone else. We just don't want another wave. But, if that news does come to be true, we could always make adjustments, maybe in the spring even. But my opinion is just, as I said the other day, not to waste anyone's time, but I really feel that I don't trust that we're through the worst. I mean, I don't think it'll be as bad as last year, so yes, we're through the worst, but I don't trust that we won't get some type of bounce as a second wave. And looking at even the restaurants, like with sales tax, we've been supporting them, but I'm not going to want to sit outside in December anymore. Even honestly, even now, today's a good day, but it's getting harder to do it. So
there's always a possibility that the sales tax may decrease. We haven't seen it yet based on the actuals that we have received, but we are monitoring it very closely. With the check next week, we'll probably send out an update, and at that point, most of the revenue should have already been recorded. So it's only the December checks that would probably be affected.
And again, I think right now we're okay. I mean, we've all been going out. We've had people coming here to use our beaches and parks. We've all, but through the winter, it's going to be a different story, I'm afraid, for a lot of our businesses. I hope not, but...
There's always an exposure, yes.
Okay, thank you, Maurice.
You're welcome. Maurice, the number that of the year-to-date decline, 8.58%.
Correct.
That includes the time period in which our county was virtually completely locked down, correct?
That's correct. That's the year-to-date number, which
Right.
includes all the actuals.
So that includes a period where we had about as extreme a lockdown as we're ever going to get.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Legislator Rhodes.
Well, Presiding Officer, you kind of jumped on the question that I was going to ask, and I'm glad to hear that we're in agreement that we don't believe that next year, even though there's some risk involved, next year is going to be anywhere as bad as what we had to deal with this year. In fact, we have, unlike last year, we have plexiglass, we have masks, we have gloves, we have hand sanitizer. We're taking all of the precautions, social distancing, all of the precautions that have been recommended by the CDC and by our public health officials. So I certainly don't believe that next year's revenue estimates or next year's decline in sales tax is going to anywhere approach what we had this year. And I believe you said that this year was 8.58% year-to-date.
Year-to-date is 8.6%, correct.
And in fact, those numbers are actually getting better, are they not?
Yes, they, last couple of check, it was a -5 and change. The prior one was a -2, and the October check was actually a plus 13%.
So we actually, the October check, we actually, over
The prior year.
the prior year, we actually were making more in sales tax revenue without a pandemic than we actually made more with a pandemic this year for the October check than we made last year without a pandemic.
That check was very positive, yes.
So the trend is going towards there being less of a reduction. In fact, we're actually making more year over year to this point than we did last year.
Moody's has us projected as a -16%, I believe is their number,
For this year.
for this year, yes.
But obviously the numbers don't lie, we're obviously outperforming what Moody's estimate was, correct?
That is correct.
And we're substantially over what last year's, what their projection was, correct?
So far, yes.
And since we're seeing the trend to the point where now we're actually earning more in sales tax revenue, or receiving more in sales tax revenue than we were last year, we would have the expectation, unless there's some sort of incident, that trend would continue, correct?
That is correct.
In fact, we're moving into the holiday season where spending should be increasing historically. Is that not true?
Yes, spending will be increasing, hopefully, throughout the holiday season, but we are also comparing it against last year, which was probably a good year.
Right.
So we'll be monitoring it very closely and seeing how the next couple of checks come in. But we don't foresee having these decreases that are being projected.
Which decrease? The 16% for Moody's?
Yes, what OMB has, which is a -52.4%. We don't see that happen.
And that was with our being completely shut down for a period of approximately 4 months.
That is to get to their number, yes.
Okay.
Probably that.
Did you formulate an opinion with respect to, and obviously the discussion is with respect to the county executive's forecast for next year of there being a 20% decrease in sales tax revenue. Did you formulate an opinion with respect to what would have to occur in order for that 20% decrease in sales tax revenue to actually be realized?
That's the 52.4% in order to get to their number. At one point, we were also considering a -20%, but we were doing a -20% of the remaining checks, and versus the OMB was doing it at a -20% on all the checks. So our estimate took into account the actual checks that we had and doing the 20% of the remaining checks, not the entire budget. That led to approximately a $40 million difference, I think, was in our mid-year report. But since the mid-year, we got a couple of really good checks, better checks. And now, to get to OMB's number, that will be the -52%.
Okay.
On the remaining checks.
Okay. So based on our experience, and again, this is new territory for everyone, but based on our experience from this year with a full shutdown for a third of the year, and at this point only being down 8.6% in revenue, what would have to happen to produce a 20% decline in revenue? Would we have to be shut down an entire year, substantially all of the year? Can you forecast that?
That would be very difficult to forecast. But again, what we did, it was come up with a percentage that would need to happen, or the percent decrease that would need to happen to the remaining checks in order to get to OMB's number. And again, that's
Which is a 53% decrease?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Legislator Ferretti, then Legislator Ridgeway.
Hi, Maurice.
Hey, hello. How are you, Legislator Ferretti?
Hi. So just to touch on something that I think you and Legislator Rhodes were dialoguing on in terms of the rest of 2020 when we were taking a look at the holiday spending season. This is the first year we have internet sales tax coming into Nassau County, right?
I'm sorry, what you
Is
said?
this the first year we have internet sales tax?
Correct.
And so we didn't have that last year, right?
No, we did not have that last year.
So when you're accounting for the rest of 2020 and you're trying to project, if the holiday spending season will be as ample as last year, that's certainly a factor, right?
That will definitely be a factor, and I think that's one of the reasons why we have not seen such a big decrease, is now that we are actually collecting on the internet sales, and that's definitely helping the bottom line.
And when we talk about the roughly 8.5% decrease that we're seeing from last year, the amendment that the majority put forward, that includes a projected 12% decrease for 2021, correct?
Yeah. The amendment actually took a negative 12% on the remaining checks for the year, and then added another 1.5, which was the growth factor that OMB had included.
Right. So it's not like the amendment that the majority has put forward is anything out of line. In fact, it's quite conservative compared to what we're seeing for 2020. Would you agree with that?
It's within a range to what's happening right now.
Right. And certainly it's much more conservative than the roughly 7% projection in the Suffolk County budget for 2021. Would you agree with that?
Suffolk, yes, went a little bit more aggressive on their estimate.
What would you say, a little bit more? Was that how you would describe it?
Well,
I mean, 12% and 7% is a pretty big difference.
that is.
Yeah.
And I think the way that they did their numbers is a negative 9.5 for this year and a positive 2.7 or something for next year.
So I just want to make sure I understand. Are you saying that right now, year to date, Suffolk is 9.5% down from where they were in 2019?
What they are projecting is a 9.5 negative for this year, for 2020.
And what are we projecting?
Right now, what the amendments are doing, they're doing a negative 12% on the remaining checks. So we are being a little bit more conservative than Suffolk is.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Legislator Reggie Whitten.
Again, I've never hoped more that you guys are right. I really hope that this is the case. But, even just watching Cantor on Channel 12 and hearing about, how rent is going to be due in January 1st, and a lot of people are 5 months, 6 months behind. And, we're all kind of, I think our minority leader, Abraham's even mentioned that we're all tightening our belts right now because we don't know what's going to happen. And I trust the people that have been setting the sales tax. It's never a definite. It's always a little bit of a guess, but I think it's better to be conservative. There's just a couple other payments that I was just wondered about. The distressed pool system payment, has that been paid, or is that accounted for?
The amendment that was proposed by the majority did include that adjustment.
Okay. So, and everything else that, the other payments that we're going to be facing for that, because I heard there might be another $3.8 million coming up next year, early next year, for nursing homes and things like that.
I don't know what that 3.8 million is.
All right. What? Yeah, coming in, right.
AIM has a full year now at this point.
So, do you know what next year's estimate for AIM is?
I believe AIM is 11 million.
Okay.
Close to 11 million, yes.
Again, I remember after Sandy, like right after Sandy, everyone got their insurance checks and the sales tax went up really high. And then the next year they projected the same thing, and we knew it wasn't going to be the same. So I want to err on the cautious side. And again, we do have people that have been, this is what they do. They analyze what the projections are and what the expenses are going to be. And I sort of defer to them in this case. And Sergio, are you okay? Would it be all right if I had Sergio read a letter onto the record?
I'll just say something really quick. The county budget is very, very leveraged on sales tax. And it's one of the numbers that we have to monitor very, very closely. There's always a possibility that it may go down. Right now, the trends are positive, and our projections are based on the actual trends. If there's a downturn, we will probably need to adjust for it. But as of right now, we just don't see a downturn to this magnitude.
Let's all hope. I really hope you're right. I do. Again, with 30, Cantor also said 30% of businesses might not come back. There's going to be, I think we've been hit in waves. We've been hit with the health wave and the economic wave, and we have had CARES Act money, and that's sustained a lot of businesses, but that's going to run out eventually. Hopefully we'll get more, but it's kind of I don't want to say it's a false positive, but a lot of the money that people have right now are coming from these sources that are not going to continue forever. And even with the holidays, I don't know, maybe I'm the only one, but I feel like I'm not spending as much only because you just don't know, trying to get the kids to agree to state school too for college, but that they're not
There's
buying.
always that exposure right there, and
Yeah.
this is unprecedented time, so we will be monitoring it and sending the updates to the legislature as we get them.
And we can always adjust and do more. And I just want to also mention, we did speak with the administration, and we've worked out something with the bus. We've worked out our sprinkler legislation, so that'll be covered. It is a always moving process, but again, I think we owe it to our constituents to move slowly and carefully, especially during these times. And so, presiding officer, whenever we feel, I would love to have Sergio just read the comptroller's letter into the record.
We're not going to do that. Sergio, if you want to present the letter, you can present the letter, but
Okay.
yeah, we have a letter from the comptroller. I know we have a letter that he sent to us today. You want to just present it to the clerk's staff, we'll make it part of the record. Legislative Ford.
We have the
Thank
letter,
you.
sir.
Maurice,
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have to stay up here for a while, but, I do share the concern of Legislator Georgie Whitten, to be very cautious, moving forward, because these are unprecedented times. And, but, we go back to when we talk about those that are in the know, aside from you, we actually reached out to Dr. Cantor to review the amendments that we made, and he indicated support for our estimation of only a negative 12% decrease in the sales tax for 2021. Am I correct? Yeah. Okay. Oh. I'm not
I
gonna,
apologize.
Yeah.
Yes, I did read his report, and he does support it, yes.
And I know there is a concern even with restaurants, and I think that when Dr. Cantor was on talking about a 30% closure of businesses, I think he might have, I don't know if he just left it to just Nassau County, but it might have been the whole region, because we know that New York City has some issues over there. But, I know that, just reaching out to some of my businesses and to see how they have done, a lot of people are not going into Manhattan because it's so dangerous at this point. So people who can work from home are working from home. And I think that has been something that has been an engine to help our sales tax to go a little bit higher, because instead of spending the money elsewhere, they're spending it in their hometowns. So whether or not they're ordering, instead of buying in Manhattan, getting your food, they go and, they order from the various restaurants. I live on a dead-end street in the west end of Long Beach, and we all commented how there are like about 1 million Amazon trucks that are traveling all around. I can't tell you, one day I had a UPS guy stop in the middle of our block and open up the back and went to 6 different homes actually delivering items, all right? We have Uber Eats, we have DoorDash. So I think that might be a trend that might still follow through even when we go into winter. And I know down by me, many of our restaurants have outdoor heaters, and they're looking to be able to still be able to serve people outside. But let's go with, all of a sudden, we realize that it is going to go south a bit, and maybe the sales tax will dip. I know that Legislator Georgie Whitten had said that, we could always do an adjustment in the spring. So I'm going to guess that if we hold off and we only borrow what we really need at this point, and then we can see and take a look at what this economy is going to, is it possible then for us to be able to borrow in the spring if we need to?
I believe PFM had said yes. I'm not 100%, but that was based on their report. I think the amendments, as of right now, reflect the current trends. There may be a possibility, and Legislator Luigi brought it up, that we may start seeing a downturn, but as of right now, it hasn't happened yet. When it does, we will update our numbers and send updates to the legislature. There may be a need in the future, but as of right now, the trends are not there.
Okay. And I don't know if you can answer this question, but I'll pose it anyway. All right, because I do care about my constituents. I don't want them, I see them struggling, those that have lost their jobs or whatever. But that being said, if we borrow all of the money now, we're saddled with that debt. Am I correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so, based on the fact that I read this morning that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has reached out to Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi to start speaking about the package that they want, the relief package. So say all of a sudden they decide to sit down and they're going to say, let's work something out, and they come up with that they're going to give the county $100 million in relief aid because of the pandemic. Can that, so say we borrow all this money, now we're saddled with this, whatever, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of restructured debt, but now we get this $100 million from the federal government in relief aid. Can that be applied to repay the loans or pay up the debt, or what, or does that happen to be like, we just have excess money at this point?
I'm not 100% sure. That question will probably have to be posed to PFM. But I would think if you engage now and borrow the money now and you get $100 million, you might either be able to repay it, or that money will probably be used for other purposes in the budget. I'm not 100% sure what the correct answer is. PFM probably could answer that question.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have Legislator Walker?
That's all right. Okay. I understand that we can't predict the future. If we did, none of us would be just having these jobs that we have right now. But the budget that is presented by the county executive saddles us with a future of almost $238 million more in debt than the budget that we are presenting. That's factual by the numbers that are here. We never know what tomorrow is going to bring. 8 years ago, I never anticipated that I was going to have to go through cancer treatments and everything else, and I am lucky enough to be sitting here. Some people aren't so lucky. We don't know what the future holds, but we do know by all the projections that you have given us, all the information that we have, that we are on an upward trend as far as our sales tax goes. And I think for us to saddle future generations, certainly us that are sitting here today, but I look at my children and my grandchildren, and to think about saddling them with millions and millions and millions of dollars in debt because we don't know if our sales tax projections are right now. We don't know if they're going to be continue to be as good as they have been, is a travesty to all of our residents. And I know I'm getting bombarded with phone calls and text messages and emails because of people now facing disastrous school tax hikes due to assessment. So there's other issues that our residents are dealing with and have to face. But I just think that we're focusing on one aspect, and because of that, we're not moving forward yet. We're saddling our future with tremendous, tremendous debt, and I think that's very wrong for our taxpayers.
Legislator Rhodes?
One other question, Maurice. Obviously, and as Legislator Walker framed, the debate is sales tax estimates and additional revenue coming into the county that the county executive is making up for to accommodate her 20% reduction in her projection for sales tax revenue, is making up for that in borrowing. Essentially, she's borrowing more than the county needs. In fact, engaging in additional borrowing more than the county needs at a higher rate than she probably has to pay because she's intending to use bond premium. Correct? Bond premium is part of her budget?
There is a certain amount of bond premium in the budget, I believe. I don't recall the exact number, but there is.
But I'm correct in my understanding that the concept of bond premium is that in order for them to give us additional
monies, you have to pay
monies, we're paying at a higher interest rate than we would ordinarily have to pay.
That is correct.
So not only is the sales tax estimate being what it is, saddling our taxpayers with more debt, they're having to pay more than the going rate for that debt so that she can get that money in the first place, correct?
That is the concept of the bond premiums, yes.
Okay. If in fact, and we've spoken about the possibility of being able to revise the budget sometime in the spring based upon what we see actual sales tax revenues being, with the opportunity to see what the pandemic does and whether or not there is a second wave. If there is a second wave, whether that second wave is worse than what we anticipated, we would still have the opportunity to be able to borrow at that time in the market, correct?
I believe that is correct, but we would have to just verify that with BFM and make sure that that answer is correct. But I do believe that it's correct, basically.
And your experience from this year has been, and it certainly makes sense, that the interest rates came down as a result of the pandemic, correct?
That's correct.
That rates came down, they freed up capital, made access to capital easier for not only municipalities but for businesses as well, made access to capital easier, and that's reflected in lower interest rates, and that's what we're seeing now. In fact, one of the reasons that we're engaging in debt restructuring is because the interest rates are so much lower now for new debt that's issued that enables us to reissue old debt at higher rates and issue new debt at lower rates to save on debt service payments. In fact, the county executive's plan to balance the budget is based on that debt restructuring, correct?
It's based on the cash flow savings that could be garnered from doing the restructuring.
Right. So it would stand to reason that if, in fact, this pandemic got worse, we would, in fact, see, in all likelihood, lower rates than there are today.
Possibility, yes.
And it's a pretty good possibility based on how the markets function, right?
Correct.
So by not issuing debt today that we don't need to issue, we do still have the opportunity potentially come the spring to engage in the issuance of that debt if the sales tax revenue projections that we have in our budget turn out not to be accurate. We do have the opportunity to issue additional debt at, in fact, lower rates than we have today. Potentially, that's a real possibility.
And we may have to, depending on what happens, to your point, in the next couple of paychecks and a couple of sales tax revenues. So if the next couple of sales tax revenues start thinking, then we may not have a choice but to do that.
Right.
But that's further down the line.
And in fact, we're not talking about just tanking. We're talking about collapsing in order to meet the numbers
Yes.
that the county executive has forecast in her budget, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Worse than the original shutdown, in fact, right?
Yes.
Substantially worse than the original shutdown.
52% was the number.
Right. Thank you.
Yes.
Legislator Rizzi Wynn.
Hi, Maurice. Do you have any idea of what type of state aid the county might be receiving? Do you know what number it would be?
I can get you that number. I don't have that number with me right now, but I can get you that number.
Okay.
In the latest projection, we started accounting for a 20% cut to the state aid. So our projection included a projected decrease in state aid.
There's just a lot of moving parts.
There are tons of moving parts. And for now, we are at a certain position. It may change. We don't know the answer yet. So we have to wait for the next couple of sales tax checks in order to probably decide what we want to do. If we have to react to certain things.
Thank you, Maurice.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have anything for Maurice? No? No, thank you, Maurice. Appreciate it. See that we have the county attorney here, Mr. Cashow. Would just invite you to come up to the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. Good afternoon, everyone. Nassau County Attorney Jared Cashaw. Good afternoon, Mr. Presiding Officer, Ms. Minority Leader, members of the legislature. I understand that there may be some questions with respect to the two opinions that the County Attorney's Office issued dated October 28th and November 4th. We're happy to discuss those opinions and address any questions to the extent possible. If we're unable to answer any questions immediately, we'll certainly get back to Legislative Council as quickly as possible.
Okay, so in a nutshell, the opinion was that the legislature is not authorized under the county charter to change revenue estimates in the county executive's proposed budget. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, Your Honor. Excuse me. Yes, Mr. Presiding Officer.
Tell me what that entails. What does revenue estimates entail?
Revenue estimates would include any The anticipated, actually, it's defined, I think, in the charter, if I turn to, let me know, yes. So Article 3 of the county charter.
I did. I tried that. It didn't work.
Yeah, Kevin's back on it. See, there he is.
I just went back on. Anyone hear me?
Yeah.
He texted us, June, he's working on it. They know we're gone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear.
I hear you. I don't see the meeting.
Yeah, I hear you.
See the meeting. I don't hear anybody up there.
Well, we're not speaking right. Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Yeah, we
Yep.
can hear you.
Okay.
Now we hear.
Yeah.
Bill sounds very enthusiastic. Okay, tell us what is entailed with revenue estimates.
Certainly. So Article 3 of the county charter, as the legislature knows well, establishes the county's comprehensive budget process, and that's described beginning at Section 300B of the county charter. The description of what revenue estimates, or the definition, in fact, of what revenue estimates includes, is found at Section 300B, subsection 3 of the county charter. I'm happy to read that to the legislature if that's helpful.
Yes.
Sure. Revenue estimates. A, revenue estimate categories for the following 3 fiscal years shall include but not be limited to the following. Subsection 1, revenue estimates from sales taxes, property taxes, miscellaneous revenues, anticipated federal and state aid, categorical grants, and anticipated asset sales. Subsection 2, the impact of any tax increases or reductions and anticipated changes in federal or state aid based on new legislation shall be included in revenue estimates. And subsection 3, any other information required by this law. There's also a subsection 4, the information required by Resolution 321-D-1999, except that such information shall be supplied for a 3-year period and not the 2-year period set forth therein. And forgive me, I don't know exactly what 321-D-1999 provides as I stand here now.
That is a very comprehensive definition. It basically includes every conceivable that I could think of revenue that the county would receive. There may be something miscellaneous, but you're talking about virtually the entire revenue side of the county's budget.
That's the definition included in the county's comprehensive budget.
And you included in that, and not you, but the charter includes within that property tax, correct?
I believe, yes, that was one of the elements that was listed, yes, subsection 1.
So you're telling this legislature that we have no ability to take out the county's estimate of property tax estimate, correct? So we can't remove a property tax?
Respectfully, Mr. Presiding Officer, I'm not telling. That's what the law has yielded.
Okay, so you're telling me that the county law says that this legislature does not have the ability to remove a property tax increase by the county executive?
What I'm saying. Let me defer to, I also have with me, forgive me, Paul Hersfeld, Deputy County Attorney, and also Bureau Chief of Legal Counsel.
Okay.
The property tax is fixed in under Section 306 by virtue of the amount that is appropriated in the budget, less what the other estimated revenues are. So in other words, the amount of property tax that has to be raised is determined by how much is spent in the budget, less the other sources of revenue.
Well, I mean, the opinion says that we can't change revenue estimates, and the definition that was just provided to us includes within the term of revenue estimates property taxes. So right. My interpretation is what the county attorney's opinion is that the legislature can't take out a property tax increase.
Not without lowering the amount that's appropriated in the budget.
But okay, so then we can, if we lower what's appropriated in the budget, then we can also change the sales tax estimate? Is that what you're saying?
No, if you lower the amount appropriated in the budget, the amount of property tax that will be collected automatically as a matter of calculation pursuant to Section 306 of the Charter will be lower.
Here's the problem that we face with this opinion. We think it has an extremely weak foundation. We think, if challenged, the court will go in another direction. That's number one. Number two, the problem is that we can't get to the courts because our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are not going to vote for this override. So there will be no issue for us to go to the courts. But we will have this document sitting out there, the memorandum of opinion saying we can't challenge revenue estimates. You know, some of us have been here for 25 years, and legislators, leaders, Democrats, Republicans have fought against county executives for years. Democrat county executives, Republican county executives, for the prerogative of this legislature as a separate body to have equal powers. This opinion substantially guts legislative powers. After fighting on these battles for 25 years, we have an opinion from the county attorney that we can't challenge because it won't be right for the courts. You know, I think this has done more damage to the institution of the legislature, if accepted, than anything that's happened since I've been here. Again, we think it's weak. I mean, you're relying on a Fourth Department case involving a county charter, a city charter that's substantially different, has different terminology. From 1936, you're relying on a Supreme Court opinion that involved dicta on this issue. It wasn't even the central claim. You look at the legal papers, it wasn't what was asked for in terms of the people that brought the action. So, I mean, you know, to tie our hands with that is just, it's terrible. I mean, we would love to be able to challenge it, but we can't. From a legal standpoint, it will not be ripe because will not have been bound by it in terms of the actions we're taking because the minorities not voted for. So if we could get the votes for an override, we could then bring it to the courts and challenge your interpretation, but we can't until they vote for that. So, anyone else have any questions? Legislator Rhodes and Ferretti.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. Just to follow up on the presiding officer's points, Mr. Cashow, this opinion, with all due respect, has to be probably the single greatest work of fiction that I've read this year. And I read pretty avidly. Because not only are you essentially suggesting in your opinion that if the county executive had proposed a 20% increase in taxes, we would have no power to be able to repeal that tax increase, which is simply an opposite to common sense. Let's say, for example, the county executive made a determination, sorry with the plexiglass, I know the lines of vision aren't great, but let's say with respect to borrowing. Let's say in the county executive's budget, she relies on borrowing $1 billion, and that's how she makes up her revenue estimate. You're essentially saying that we have no ability to take out that $1 billion in borrowing. That simply doesn't make sense, and it's simply not how the separation of powers works, and it belies a complete misunderstanding of the responsibility of this legislature. And to the presiding officer's point, your justification for it and your reliance upon the Abrahams versus Mangano case is certainly weak, as the presiding officer said, but it's also not precedent. The basis for decision, and in fact, it's sort of Abrahams versus Mangano undercuts your argument in a sense, because the Abrahams versus Mangano case, the situation was exactly what is happening here, where the legislature actually vetoed a tax increase that was imposed by the county executive. And the question before the court had nothing to do with whether the legislature had the power to be able to veto that tax increase and change revenue estimates in that regard. It had to do with the county executive's power to be able to exercise the line item veto of the budget that the legislature passed. So the ruling in this case and the dicta that was issued by, I believe it was Justice Bruno in that case, is not controlling legal authority because it's not directly on point with the circumstances that we're talking about here. It also relies upon that Fourth Department decision, which name escapes me at this point, Robertson
versus Hogan.
Where it's comparing, where Judge Bruno in this particular instance is trying to compare the charter in the city of Buffalo, which does not contain the catch-all language that we have in Section 305 of the county charter, and is trying to impose that upon the county. So even if the ruling was not dicta and was controlling, the ruling is also off point, because unlike the city of Buffalo charter, which says that the council may strike out or reduce items therein and may add thereto items of appropriation. That's all it says. Section 305 of the Nassau County Charter says, after the conclusion of such hearings, the county legislature may strike out or reduce any item of appropriation in the county budget, before, however, inserting any additional item. Right? That's language that our charter contains that Buffalo City Charter does not. So even if that was controlling legal authority, it's not on all fours with what we're dealing with in Nassau County. And in fact, the courts have addressed this in other litigation. Specifically, the Kessel versus D'Amato case. Now, in your opinion, you talk about the Second Department and what the Second Department found, but what you don't discuss is what the findings in the lower court were, and the exhaustive discussion that was engaged in by Judge Wilkes, where he goes through the county charter and goes through each of the definitions, one of which is what exactly is a revenue source, with the conclusion that the county legislature, well, in that case it was the Board of Supervisors, does have the opportunity to be able to adjust revenue. Now, the Second Department never reached that determination because it was an accepted fact that the Board of Supervisors, which was functioning as the equivalent of the county legislature, does have the ability to adjust revenue. So I don't understand, because this actually is a case that is controlling. I don't understand how it is that you reach the conclusion that you reach, and your opinion, with all due respect, is incredibly dangerous, not just to the institution of the county legislature, but to the county as a whole. Because you're essentially saying that regardless of the source of revenue, a tax increase that's imposed by the county executive, borrowing that's suggested by the county executive, that this legislature has no voice, and that the people of the county of Nassau have no voice through their elected legislative representatives to be able to adjust or modify that whatsoever. Essentially, the county executive gets to do whatever they want, and that's not the state of the law. And I wish we had the opportunity to be able to challenge this issue, and unfortunately, as the presiding officer mentioned, we won't in the context of this, because I doubt that we're going to receive the votes unless there's a change in their position. I doubt that we're going to receive the votes to be able to override the county executive's veto, which would then make that issue ripe for consideration by the courts. But I think you would face an impossible battle justifying the opinions that you've rendered through not only your first, but more particularly through your second opinion that you've registered. What you've provided us is an opinion, and with all due respect, I reject that opinion.
Legislator Ferretti.
Thank you. Hello. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Legislator.
I think that the presiding officer and Legislator Rhodes got pretty in-depth in terms of the opinion. I share their opinion that I was very, very disappointed, to say the least, to read this opinion. But let me just ask you, the first opinion that you rendered, Mr. Cascio, what date was that? Is that October 26th?
I believe it was the 28th.
28th? And who requested that opinion?
Helena Williams.
Okay. And were there any drafts exchanged with the county executive or the administration prior to rendering the final opinion?
I don't recall.
I'm sorry?
I don't recall whether a draft was sent. Certainly there were drafts exchanged between, the legal counsel and myself in putting together this, the opinion.
Well, I'm not asking that. I'm asking if there were any drafts exchanged between your office and the county executive's office.
I don't believe so.
Okay. So just to be clear, and I want to make sure I'm crystal clear on this, a proposed property tax hike, like the one we're seeing in the county executive's current budget, that's considered revenue?
By definition, under the county charter, yes.
Okay. And it's your premise that this body, the legislature, they cannot amend a revenue estimate projection in the budget, correct?
Based on the case law and our analysis of the case law and the charter, that's correct.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that I have to go back to my constituents who are suffering in the middle of this pandemic, financially and otherwise, and tell them that the property tax increase that County Executive Curran is proposing, I am completely powerless to do anything to stop it. That's what you're telling me?
I'm not telling you anything at all.
Well, you're telling me something, right?
I'm just interpreting the charter and laying out what we believe the state.
You're telling me that's what the charter says?
That's what the charter and the case law interpreting the charter says.
Okay. How would you suggest that this body would go about eliminating a property tax hike like the one we see in County Executive Curran's budget?
I don't profess to have an answer to that question.
Is there a way?
I leave that to this honorable body.
Do you know if it's ever been done in the past? Has there ever been an amendment in Nassau County made by the legislature to a county executive's budget that changed the property tax proposal?
As I stand here now, I don't have that answer.
You didn't look into that before rendering this opinion?
No, we were asked to render an opinion with respect to what Section 305 of the charter means.
Okay, thank you.
Legislator McKevin?
I think everyone's already probably had a full appetite of legal arguments back and forth at this point, but I just want to go and just read an excerpt actually from the Kessel versus D'Amato case, which is actually the second department of the Appellate Division of the State of New York, which was rendered on November 19th, 1979. And what that case had specifically dealt with was the 1979 Nassau County budget, where the then Board of Supervisors, which was the legal predecessor of this body, the county legislature, had indeed increased the budgetary estimate of revenue over the budget that had come from the county executive. And a Mr. Kessel, yes, the same Mr. Kessel we all do know, brought an action against Mr. D'Amato, who at that time was the town of Hempstead supervisor and was the vice chair of the Board of Supervisors. And again, the decision went back and forth. I'm just going to read to you a couple of excerpts from the decision, but if anyone wants to read it further, it is located at 79 Appellate Division 2nd, 790. And what it states is, what was argued is, although petitioners argue persuasively that once the legislative budget hearing on the adoption of a budget has been held, public interest militates against allowing any increase in the budgetary estimates of revenue without a further hearing, we find no statutory support for that position. The Nassau County government law requires a new public hearing only if the legislative body proposes to change the budget by increasing an existing amount of appropriation or inserting a new one. An appropriation, as the word is used by the law of municipal corporations relating to the appropriations of monies, is a setting apart of a designated sum for a particular purpose or purposes. The word has also been defined as a designation of money raised by taxation to be withdrawn from the public treasury for a specifically designated purpose. The word appropriation does not include estimates of revenues, and we cannot find any support for petitioner's theory that it does include in the language or the history of the Nassau County government law. Since the issue we must decide relates to the meaning of that law and not the desirability of changing it, we must uphold the validity of the budget. So what the court in that decision was, it specifically upheld the 1978 budget, which did increase the estimates of revenue that the Board of Supervisors did over the county executive. So again, it is clear to me that we do indeed have the power to do it, and I just respectfully disagree with the opinion to the contrary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Legislator Reggie Witten.
I just want to clarify one thing that was mentioned with the tax increase. There is no tax increase in the county executive's budget. What it is it's an increase in the sewer line, and this happened because we have additional properties on the roll. this also happened last year, and everyone voted for that. So it's not a tax hike; it's an increase in people using the sewer. So
We respectfully disagree. There is a tax increase in the sewer fund, and there is a tax increase in the general fund. So they're both present.
Right,
I mean, you can categorize it in any way that you want, but when you fail to override this veto, those tax increases stay.
But it's not as if there isn't, it's not as a property tax. Basically, there's just more people signing up for the sewer line, including like what's happening in Seacliff. So, you know, it's not, it's just new customers basically, rather than a across-the-board tax hike, which is sort of, in my opinion, what I felt wasn't applied.
People are going to be paying more in taxes. I mean, it might not be the greatest amount, but people are going to be paying more in taxes. And what should have been done, and what we believe they should have done with the administration, with both the general fund and the sewer fund, was simply fold those new customers, new ratepayers, new taxpayers in, and keep the budget line flat. That's what our position is. But they have chosen not to do that. They've chosen to increase the tax rate.
Well, again, it's because there are more people signed up for the role, and of course with that also, you know, there's more expenses, as we all know also. So I don't know if it would stay flat if you have more people signed up for it.
It would. We're taking it out. We would take it out with our amendments.
But you don't know if the expenses go up because there's more customers. But regardless, it's not across the board tax increase as I thought was implied. So I just wanted to clarify that. It's specific to the sewer role increasing, which is exactly what we did last year, and there wasn't an issue with that. So.
Okay. Now, before we get into comments on this, does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Cashow? Legislator Rhodes?
Yeah, sorry, just one last question. You said it was Helena Williams that actually came to you to request this particular opinion?
That's who the opinion is addressed to, yes.
Okay. Were you presented a question or a conclusion?
I was presented a question.
Okay. Were you told what the conclusion was supposed to be?
Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm. And were there any exchanges, and just to follow up on Legislator Ferretti's question, were there any exchanges between Helena Williams and anyone within the county attorney's office discussing the conclusions that were reached by the county attorney?
No, but I'm also going to object on the grounds of privilege.
Well, you're the legislature's attorney, aren't you?
I wear multiple hats. I'm counsel to the legislature and counsel to...
So what you're saying in this issue is...
We're not going to put you in that position.
Right.
I mean, ask your questions, but if you feel that something touches on privilege to communications, then we're not going to ask you that.
Thank you.
Okay, but go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone, other questions for... Okay. All right. Thank you, Jared. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
All right. Legislator Ferretti.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I just want to make clear, because I think Legislator DeRiggi-Whitten was referring to my comments about the property tax hike. And just to be clear, I'm not implying it. I'm saying it flat out. This is a property tax increase during a pandemic that the county executive is levying on every Nassau County resident. It's approximately $9 million in total. $5,266,643 to the general to the sewer tax line, and $3,854,541 to the general fund line. As the presiding officer said, if her justification for her property tax hike, or your justification for supporting it, is that this is just more customers, you can certainly do as our amendment did and lower the amount that every resident would have to pay. The county executives and apparently the minority is deciding not to do that, and instead raising property taxes on every Nassau resident during a pandemic. It's unconscionable, and I will not support that. Thank you.
Anyone else like to be heard? Just in general? I know the minority leader had some comments.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just to recap where we are today, we heard from the county attorney, and from that standpoint, as we had indicated at the time of the budget vote, we still believe that this vote today, by inflating the sales tax projections, is illegal. Now, I've heard a lot from the majority in regards to whether or not questioning that opinion, calling that opinion potentially fictional. But ultimately, that is his opinion. The county attorney did not draft the charter, did not draft any amendments to the charter, did not proceed as the county attorney during any of these cases, whether it was Abrams versus Mangano or any of these other issues. He is giving his interpretation. His interpretation today states that if we proceed this way, we are proceeding in an illegal fashion. You could take that for what it is. The bottom line is, I agree with you from the standpoint that, yes, this cripples the powers of the legislature. And I would have loved for the majority to join me when Abraham Mangano came up, because our counsel, Pete Kleins, specified the separation of powers in our argument. So I would have loved to have heard a large amount of voices during that particular time. That being said, we are where we are. And if we are going to look to make changes so that we can crystallize the legislature's position so that future county executives, if they do propose, which this budget does not have, property tax increases, that the legislature has the power to amend that. I would love to join with you on that. But today, at the 11th hour, it is not the time. The county attorney has specified very clearly that if we choose to go forward, we are proceeding in an illegal fashion. We can take that for what it is. That's my 2 cents on the actual illegal part. As it pertains to the fiscal part, in every single segment of this country, we are seeing COVID cases go up. Not just here in New York, but across the country. From that standpoint alone, we have to exercise some level of caution that it could potentially resurface here in New York. Now, I want to commend the governor. I want to commend the county executive, our Department of Health officials. They have done an excellent job in making sure that this county, this state, is one of the safest places to be in this country. That being said, we have to exercise some caution. I hope to God we do not see what we saw earlier this year in terms of the shutdown, in terms of the amount of cases and the amount of deaths that have happened to Nassau County residents. I hope that does not happen. But to criticize and say the county executive's budget because it fiscally has a sales tax projection of negative 20%, to lower it to negative 12%, to me is unconscionable. We're going in the wrong direction. We're not out of this pandemic, despite what many say throughout our levels of government. We are not turning the corner and we are not out of this pandemic. It is very possible that we may see a second wave. If we don't, and I hope to God we don't, then from that standpoint, we can always adjust. Think about what we're doing today. We are saying to Nassau County residents that we are prepared to spend more. In what level of government are they saying, let's spend more? Everybody is belt tightened. No one, and my kids would probably refute this, but I'm not spending more during this holiday season than I have in the past. There's no way. Everyone's going to be belt tightening. And I think they're expecting Nassau County elected officials to be belt tightening as well. And if this county executive has presented a budget with a negative 20% sales tax, and she feels she can manage the budget without a property tax increase, we should be applauding that during this tough fiscal time. Instead, they're trying to inflate that. And I think that's just reckless and irresponsible. I'm making this plea to the presiding officer. Rich, if there's an issue in regards to the bonding, let's come together. We still have time. Let's come together between now and the early part of next year and hammer it out. That's the time for us to try to figure out what's best for Nassau County residents. The county executive has developed her position. The majority has drew a line in the sand in their position, and let's figure out where we can meet in the middle. Let's try to get together and figure it out how we can meet in the middle. We understand your position and we understand her position, but now we need to figure out how we can come and meet in the middle, because it's really just going to hurt Nassau County residents at the end of the day. Because ultimately, our job is to make sure that services are not hindered. We have to continue to make sure property taxes not increased, and Nassau County residents have the best ability to be able to live their lives here in the county healthy as well as safe. So from that standpoint, I am making that plea to you. I understand where we are today. I understand that this override vote is going to happen. I understand that it's going to probably go an 11-8 vote. I totally understand that. But I'm making this plea to you from a standpoint, because we still have time going into the early part of next year, and let's figure out how each side can come off their position and somehow meet in the middle. But as it pertains today, as I said before, this budget, this override, the budget amendments, we stand by our position that they are proceeding in an illegal fashion. And from that standpoint, I am encouraging my side of the legislative minority to not engage and to vote no to the override. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kavan. And certainly, regardless of what happens today, obviously our side will stay engaged in the process, and we will continue to meet or to discuss or whatever needs to take place as we go forward. Before we get to the vote on this, I wanted to offer the minority the opportunity. There are a whole bunch of different amendments within our overall amendments, and I'll offer the minority the opportunity. I will break out any of individual amendments if they want to vote, if they are willing to vote for those specific amendments. You guys have any specific amendments that you can vote for that I can break out?
Come on, I think we.
Yes, Presiding Officer, I think from the standpoint that obviously those amendments would be funded with the sales tax percentage being lessened from 20% to 12%, which we believe, and as well as the county attorney has already substantiated, would be illegal. We don't feel it's best to proceed. That is the reason why we proceeded with making an agreement with the county executive to make sure that the things that we thought was most crucial. We would love to have done them all, but the things that we thought was most crucial, such as the bus, making sure that the bus subsidy was addressed, the smart sprinklers, as well as the EMTs, from that standpoint, we felt that we needed to carve out those things. We truly believe that the county executive will honor that agreement that those things will be protected. So, unfortunately, respectfully, we will not be able to vote for anything that you parse out. We feel that the agreement we have with the county executive is sufficient. And from that standpoint, because the sales tax and because of what the county attorney has said in regards to the nature of the sales tax, from those two avenues, we cannot proceed with any of the override votes, whether they're parsed out or they're put together in their entirety.
Well, I understand what you're saying as well. You've gotten commitments from the county executive. But what we're saying is, regardless of commitments, we can make an affirmative vote now on those items, and it will be required going forward. So rather than relying on the good faith of the county executive, we would, we think we should be voting on these individual items. I would also note that one of the items does not even alter or amend the budget. In fact, we have created the Special Revenue Fund, which is a good government initiative, which will take additional revenues beyond the sales tax projections, and additional revenues should they come in terms of stimulus monies, and deposit that into a special revenue fund so that we can begin to pay down the massive refund liability that this county faces. So that's not even, that in and of itself is not, even if you use the pretext that there's something's illegal about what we're doing, about the sales tax estimates, that is not relying on the sales taxes. So the minority can vote for that without coming into conflict with the county attorney's opinion. So I'll offer that again. Can we bring, if I'm going to get some votes from the other side, I would encourage them to vote for that. Is any interest on the other side in voting for the amendment establishing the reserve fund, special revenue fund?
I said before, Presiding Officer, we stand firm in our understanding with the county executive. We would have loved to hear from you in regards to this proposal where we could have digested a little bit more prior to this vote, but we're standing firm with our position that we plan to vote against the override. Obviously, if there is a proposal that we can look at for a future budget, we'll be happy to look at that as well.
All right. Okay, thank you. Well, what I'll do now is we'll offer up any legislator who wants to make a comment at this point. Then we're going to have a roll call vote. So legislators, who wants to comment on this? Sorry, I thought Legislator Rhodes.
Thanks. It's disappointing to hear the minority refuse to take a stand and refuse to back up what are numerous good government proposals that were part of the budget amendments that were made by the majority. I'm particularly concerned about the minority rolling over, in a sense, to the opinion of the county executive and to the opinion of the county attorney, which is simply an opinion with respect to the powers of this legislature. Understand that by your vote today, if you choose that you're not going to override, you're essentially assenting to what is a power grab by the county executive. That anytime there's an increase in taxes, like there is in this budget, anytime there's an increase in borrowing that's part of a budget proposal, regardless of what the amount, anytime that there is a revenue source forecast that we would choose to oppose, we've now lost our ability to amend. The choice that's going to be offered to us is to vote the budget down in its entirety. And we can't make any changes to the revenue portion of that budget. We've lost our power to reject tax increases, lost our power to reject borrowing. You will be turning over enormous power to the county executive. And I urge caution on the part of the minority, because at some point in time, the shoe may very well be on the other foot. And you may have a different county executive that is proposing things that you may not like. And you're leaving yourself without any power to be able to stop it. And so before we simply accept what is nothing more than an opinion, no ruling, there's no precedent, we've been through the case law, and I think effectively debunked the county attorney's opinion, it is simply an opinion. And this legislature has the power to do whatever it is that you want. And by not voting to override the veto, we're losing the opportunity to have that issue litigated to its ultimate conclusion, because there really should be an answer to that. But I'm also disappointed with respect to a number of the items. It's just as poor in the sense of supporting the taxpayers of Nassau County to have a budget that underestimates revenue as badly as it is one that overestimates revenue. Our job as a county is to be net zero to the extent that we can, to as accurately as we can forecast our revenues, to as accurately as we can spend those revenues in a way that supports the taxpayers of this county and fulfills the functions of the county. The county executive is underestimating what our sales tax revenues are going to be to the tune of $100 million. And in order to fill the gap that she's created by that underestimate of revenue, we are actually saddling Nassau County taxpayers with $500 million of debt. That change in revenue forecast is going to result in taxpayers paying over the majority's amendments an additional $238 million over the 15 years of the loan, and will be extending NIFA by at least 10 years to 2035. That is tremendously unfair to the taxpayers of Nassau County, simply because the county executive has decided that she's going to accept an estimate with respect to sales tax revenue that has not been justified by the comptroller. He issued a letter. Nowhere in that letter does it actually explain how he reaches the conclusions that he reaches. He didn't come down here to describe to us how it was that he actually reached those conclusions and provide any justification for the estimate that the county executive uses. Yet that's the estimate that we're being asked to accept. It doesn't reflect the reality of what we dealt with this year when we actually had the pandemic and have only sustained an 8.6% decline in revenue. Instead, the county executive insists that next year is going to have a 20% decline based on nothing. Suffolk County Executive, Steve Ballone, in Suffolk County's budget, which is in the same region as us, has forecast a decline in sales tax revenue of only 7.2%. Is Steve Ballone reckless and irresponsible, which is the terminology that was used with respect to the 12%, which is vastly more conservative than what Suffolk County is estimating? Is the county executive prepared to say that to her colleague in Suffolk County? Because effectively, she is. And effectively, the minority in this legislature is doing the same by accepting that figure. And by accepting that figure, you are condemning future taxpayers to an additional $500 million in debt, which will cost the county and its taxpayers $238 million in debt service payments and payments for the extension of NIFA over the course of the next 15 years. The Special Revenue Fund. Nassau County owes to our residential and commercial property taxpayers and to utilities over $500 million that we are paying 9% statutory interest on, we being the taxpayers of Nassau County. Let's review for a second what the county executive's plan is to actually pay off the over $500 million that we owe to those individuals and companies. That's it. There is no plan. The creation of a special revenue fund actually creates a path forward so that we can put the money that the county owes back into the pockets of the taxpayers who actually pay the bills around here. We are in the middle of a pandemic. Businesses and individuals are suffering. Why it is that we are not committing to a revenue fund that will put money back into their pockets when it is cost neutral to the county is beyond me. And why it's being tied to this ridiculous opinion from the county attorney's office makes absolutely no sense. This has nothing to do with revenue. What it has to do is if we receive additional sales tax money, if we receive additional aid from the federal government, it will take that money, put it back into a special revenue fund, which will then be used to pay the money that we owe to the taxpayers of Nassau County. It doesn't solve the problem, but it at least creates a path forward in a fiscally responsible way. Yet that is what the minority will be voting against if they fail to override the county executive's veto. And yes, they've negotiated a side deal with the county executive to restore funding to NICEBUS, which was one of the majority's amendments. But they have left in the lurch the Office of Minority Affairs. They have left in the lurch the Office of Asian American Affairs. In case anybody's noticed, over the summer, we've had a lot of issues, nationally and locally, with respect to the way government is responding to and is incorporating our minority populations into the promise of Nassau County. The Office of Minority Affairs is that bridge to making sure that we fill the promises that we've made to all of the citizens of Nassau County to ensure equal access to the opportunities that we provide. And the Office of Minority Affairs has historically now, during the course of this administration, been underserved. An executive director to the Office of Minority Affairs was the last executive appointment made by the current administration. Over a year and a half into the current administration, that office did not have a permanent executive director. That office is staffed at just over half of the number of personnel that it's budgeted for, compromising that office's ability to properly function. And now today, we're going to make it worse by rejecting a majority amendment trying to add even more staff to that office so that it could fulfill its important obligations. And the same is the case with the Office of Asian American Affairs, which was created by act of this legislature, and we have an obligation to support it. I know that some of my colleagues will speak about some of the other provisions, most specifically a rat extermination program that was offered as an amendment by my colleague, Legislator Ferretti, which is critically important to the safety of our residents, which is also left by the wayside in the side deal that was reached by the minority. But ultimately, the county executive has presented a budget that borrows more than we need to at rates that are substantially higher than what we need to pay. She is raising taxes on the residents of this county, and she is further obligating future residents, our kids, to having to pay $238 million more in debt. That is not fiscal responsibility. And the majority amendments that were offered presented a balanced budget and a more responsible plan to go forward. And the position of the minority that we should borrow first and then ask questions later and reevaluate our position makes absolutely no sense. The more fiscally responsible thing to do is have realistic revenue estimates, which are the 12% figure in our budget. And if it turns out that those estimates are not correct, then investigate whether we need to borrow. When rates, if the pandemic gets worse, when rates, as testified to by Maurice Chalmers, may in fact be lower than they are today. And we should be doing that financing through the county as opposed to doing that financing through NIFA, which is also an important element to the majority amendments. Because we have the capacity, if we borrow only what we need, to do that on our own at lower rates and not at the same time saddle our taxpayers with the bureaucracy, unelected bureaucracy, that NIFA continues to provide at taxpayer expense. So, I would urge the minority to reevaluate their position, and I hope that that's not falling on deaf ears. But by failing to override today, you have blown a $285 million hole in this budget that needs to be filled either by a 10% tax increase, massive cuts, or by an additional $500 million, $500 million in borrowing. So please think about that when you're casting your votes and act responsibly for Nassau County's taxpayers in overriding this veto and approving the majority's amendments. Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer.
Anyone else? Legislator Ferretti.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The County Executive's 2021 proposed budget imposes a property tax hike of $9 million on Nassau residents. Despite the administration and the County Executive herself continuously calling her proposed budget a no property tax hike budget, the numbers tell a different story. Raising property taxes during a pandemic is unconscionable, and the majority's amendments eliminate the County Executive's 2021 proposed property tax hike. Since OMB presented the sales tax projection of a 20% decrease at the height, back at the height of the pandemic, the administration seems hell-bent on two things. Number one, extending the life of NIFA. At first for 30 years, now it seems to be down to 15 years. And two, borrowing much more money than the situation calls for. If you look at the constraints the previous administration was under and compare it to the lack of constraints the current administration has been held to, it's easy to guess why they want NIFA to continue in perpetuity. In terms of borrowing over $100 million more than needed, saddling our children and grandchildren with unmanageable debt, the only possible reason could be to have a ton of unnecessary extra cash borrowed on hand in an election year. The estimated 20% reduction in sales tax for the 2021 budget is clearly not supported by data. The majority amendment reducing that number to 12% is still drastically more conservative than the actual numbers we are seeing in 2020 and drastically more conservative than the Suffolk County 2021 projection. Now, it's true that the COVID positive cases are on the rise. However, it's also true that so is sales tax. Just recently, the county executive had a press conference announcing that movie theaters are reopening in Nassau County, even as COVID numbers are increasing. And let's talk about the COVID numbers increasing. Currently in New York, the 7-day average of positive cases is 2,163 per day. We haven't had a 7-day average that high since the first week of May, when we were locked down. Yet still, sales tax revenue is increasing. Just recently, Newsday published a story saying traffic is back to pre-COVID numbers. The facts are clear. This says nothing of possible federal assistance, which is not considered in the budget. The majority amendments take into consideration quality of life issues as well. I implore all legislators to support my amendment to fund the restoration of the county rat extermination program. We should not have rats running rampant in our communities. In closing, we have amended the budget, addressing quality of life concerns, eliminating the county executive's property tax hike, and relieving our children and grandchildren of the debt the county executive is trying to bestow upon them, while putting forth a balanced budget. You know, over the last couple meetings, I've heard members of the minority talk about how they're taking a conservative look at this budget. They're putting forward conservative numbers. I don't know how we have redefined the word conservative to include borrowing hundreds of millions of dollars more than we need and asking our children and grandchildren to pay for it. It's irresponsible, it's unconscionable, and it's nothing more than political trickery to sit on a stockpile of cash in an election year, and I will not support it, and I ask my colleagues to not support it as well. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'm just going to say a few words, and we're going to have a roll call vote. Much of this has been said already, so I'm not going to belabor it, but this budget raises taxes, borrows hundreds of millions of dollars more than it has to, pushing costs onto our children and grandchildren. This budget does nothing to address the county's structural problems, including, as Legislator Rhodes mentioned, $1.5 billion in tax refund liability. When the money is spent from this massive borrowing, those structural problems are still going to be there. This budget is bad for our taxpayers. It's bad for our business. It's bad for future generations in this county. The budget is good for the county executive, however. She will have plenty of cash to play with in an election year, and that's what this all comes down to, building a stockpile of cash. I urge all of my colleagues to support the amendments to override the county executive's veto. Mr. Pulitzer, please call the roll.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Deputy Presiding Officer Howard Copel.
Yes.
Alternate Deputy Presiding Officer Denise Ford.
Yes.
Legislator Sheila Bino. Legislator Carrier Solage.
No.
Legislator Deborah Muley.
No.
Legislator C. William Gaylord III.
Yes.
Legislator Vincent Muscarella.
Yes.
Legislator Ellen Birnbaum.
No.
Legislator Delia DeRigi Whitten. Legislator James Kennedy.
Yes.
Legislator Thomas McKevitt. Legislator Laura Schaefer.
Yes.
Legislator John Ferretti.
Yes.
Legislator Arnold Drucker.
No.
Legislator Rosemarie Walker. Yes. Legislator Joshua Lafazan.
No.
Legislator Stephen Rhodes. Yes. Legislator Minority Leader Kavan Abrahams.
No.
Presiding Officer Richard Nicolello.
Yes.
There is a vote of 11 yeses and 8 noes.
Okay, so that means the veto override fails. We need to have a supermajority. Motion by Legislator Rhodes to adjourn, seconded by Legislator Ford. All in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? We are adjourned. We have a Rules Committee meeting with one item, so I'd ask all Rules Committee people to still be here. Mike, can you call?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Rules Committee roll call. Legislator Sheila Bino. Thank you. Legislator Delia DeRiggi Whitten. Ranking Member Kavan Abrahams.
Here.
Legislator Laura Schaefer.
Here.
Legislator Stephen Rhodes. Vice Chairman Howard Copel.
Here.
Thank you.
No,
And Chairman Richard Nicolello.
Just get a call.
We have a quorum,
fraud
sir.
on my escrow account. They want to freeze my escrow account, which means any check that bounces on my escrow account, I get audited by the New York State Bar. So, not in a good mood right now. What?
That's Muscarella.
You muted him? Good. Alrighty, we have one item, A71, 2020, is a resolution authorizing the Commissioner of Shared Services to award and execute a purchase order between the County of Nassau, acting on behalf of the Nassau County Correctional Center and G.P. Jagger, Inc. Moved by Legislator Rhodes, seconded by Legislator DeRiggi Whitten.
Good afternoon, Captain Michael Golio from the Sheriff's Department. The item before you is the purchase of sewage grinders to service the 832 building housing areas. The vendor is the sole source. He's the inventor of the product, the sole manufacturer, and the exclusive source for service parts for this equipment. Currently, the grinders in the 832 building are original equipment from the early 1990s. They've been repaired and refurbished multiple times. They're beyond their useful life, and they're now entering a stage where they're failing. I'll answer any questions that you have.
Just briefly, what is the function of the grinders again?
The grinders grind the sewage that comes out of the inmate housing areas before it goes into the public sewage way to avoid backups in the sewage system.
Okay, and if the existing grinders fail, then the sewage system fails in the jail, correct?
Correct. It backs up into the jail.
All right, so that, I mean, there's an urgency to this, which is why we scheduled a special rules committee today to consider this.
Absolutely, yes, correct.
Legislator Rhodes?
Good afternoon. The sewage system in the jail, in fact, is failing now, correct?
Correct.
Right. So if I can ask, why has it taken so long to bring this to the legislature?
This has been an item that's been talked about for many years, prior administrations. We've repaired and refurbished the equipment to the extent that we could. There have been proposals to make the purchases previously that just haven't gotten any traction, and we're at the stage that we are now, asking for the complete replacement of the grinders, all the grinders in that building.
Well, there seems to be no question that it absolutely has to be done. I'm just concerned going forward, whether we're going to be, whether we can address future problems without it being an absolute necessity. Right? There should be some sort of maintenance to systems that are vital to the functioning of the jail and safety of the jail, so that we don't reach a point where we have to replace all of them at once. Right?
Correct, and the plan here is to purchase 12. 8 are in use at any given time. The 4 will give us the ability to do preventive maintenance and also repairs without taking the systems offline. So it'll give us a little cushion to make sure that we don't have the problems that we're currently experiencing.
And my understanding is that the problem has reached the point where we've actually had to move inmates out of particular buildings because the sewage system was backing up, correct?
There have been some transfers of inmates as a precaution. We think that the system is extremely fragile at this point.
Okay. And I know that this may be slightly off topic for your knowledge and expertise. During our budget hearings, it was disclosed that one of the reasons that we are not taking federal inmates is due to concerns of COVID. Is it not a fact that because of the problems that we're having with these muffin monsters, as they're commonly referred to, we're not sure that if a system goes down that we're going to be able to handle our own inmates. We, in fact, may have to transfer them to other jurisdictions, correct?
We currently are able to handle the amount of inmates that we have in custody. The lead time for these grinders is 4 to 6 weeks. We're hopeful that we can maintain the population for the next 4 to 6 weeks and get the grinders installed.
And if another one of these systems goes down in that next 4 to 6 weeks, are we facing a situation where we may very well have to transfer inmates to other jurisdictions to house?
I think we're facing a situation where we'd have to look at housing and maximize every possible space that we have inside the facility. It's a little premature to say we'd have to move people out.
All right, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Legislator Reggie Whitten?
Hi, I just have a quick question. I've heard that they're finding clothes or bedding or something in, this is a lovely conversation before lunch, but in the grinders, do you know where that is coming from? And
So
is it something through the laundry system, or is it intentionally being done?
So the grinders process the sewage that comes out through the wastewater from the inmate cells. So there are times and there are occasions where inmates are flushing things down the toilets that are causing the grinders to fail.
Okay, so it's nothing through the laundry system that that we can correct? It's just
It's not the laundry system, it's the acts of the inmates, correct.
All right, and I understand that the Inspector General also looked at this contract and didn't have any issues that we were made aware of.
My understanding is that's correct, yes.
And I know she's here, so just for the record. I'm sorry, is that okay, Rich?
Yes, Jody Franzese, Inspector General, Nassau County. Yes, that is correct, Legislator Durgee Whitten. We did conduct a review, and we found no reportable results.
Thank you, and it's good to have you at these meetings.
Good to see you.
It's reassuring.
Any other questions? All right. Anyone on remote? All right, thank you, Captain. All in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, carries unanimously. Motion by legislator, by no to adjourn, seconded by legislator Reggie Whitten. All in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, we are adjourned.